Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. If I'm audible, please let me know. Good morning. All right. Now, in our previous lecture, we were discussing the religious policy of Aurangzeb through a question. Neither age nor experience brought any changes to Aurangzeb's religious policy. Discuss या evaluate ऐसे कुछ था. Now, to address this, first of all, we'll have to contextualize this statement made by Sir Jadunath Sarkar. He was a subscriber to the traditionalist view on historiography regarding Aurangzeb's religious policy. क्या essence है इनके argument का? That Aurangzeb's religious policy was driven by his religious fanaticism, which was visible in his, let us say, state policy as well. This had resulted in the reversal Akbar's religious liberalism. Thus, destroying Mughal India's social fabric entirely and resulting in the decline of the Mughal Empire, and that this bigoted policy was a hallmark of Aurangzeb's reign from the beginning to the end. So, religious bigotry was visible throughout Aurangzeb's reign. So this is the essence of this argument, and this needs to be evaluated. Now, this evaluation has been done by the Marxist historians who have identified three distinct phases in the evolution of Aurangzeb's religious policy, with the first phase before 1679. Now, during this phase, Aurangzeb was definitely trying to appease the orthodox sections of his Muslim nobility and the ulema since he had dependent upon them for winning the war of succession against Dara Shikoh. Therefore, he was following a policy of appeasement towards the ulema, but at the same time, he did not want to antagonize the Hindus. And therefore, he took some steps to purify Islam initially, like banning all un-Islamic practices, those practices which were frowned upon according to the Sharia, etc. But at the same time, some controversial actions were also taken during this period, including the removal of several Hindu karodis from the Awadh region, the destruction of certain temples, etc. But उन कंट्रोवर्शियल एक्शंस के लिए कुछ ऑब्जेक्टिव मटेरियल रीजंस भी मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस ने पुट फॉरवर्ड किए हैं. Stage 2 begins in 1679 with the reintroduction of the jizya. According to the traditionalist historians, this was simply a reflection of Aurangzeb's religious bigotry and his desire to promote Islam at the cost of Hinduism. However, Marxist historians have offered alternate explanations. Initially, they tried to argue based upon the arguments put forward by Nicola Manucci that this was an economic measure, but that argument was subsequently rejected. After which alternate explanations were given that how this was an inducement given to the ulema class since Aurangzeb wanted to secure their support for his Deccan campaign against Bijapur and Golconda, other Islamic powers, right? And finally, another explanation has been given that this was a period by which time a number of revolts had already broken out against Aurangzeb, most of which were coming from non-Muslim sections. So this was a strategy used by him to suppress their rebellion. In any case, a remarkable change is visible after the conquest of Bijapur and Golconda was completed. The conquest of the Deccan was completed. And following this, Aurangzeb required the support of the local Hindu Nayakas to counter the Marathas. And a scholar, Bhim Sen, who visited the Deccan along with Aurangzeb, has observed that after 1687, there was no instance of temple destruction in the Deccan, since it would have antagonized the Nayakas. And in 1704, jizya was discontinued in the Deccan. Aurangzeb justified it in the name of providing relief to the peasants who were suffering from recurring famines, but in reality, he wanted to maintain closer relations with the Nayakas and wanted to remove a rallying cry for the Marathas, who were blaming the policy of jizya as an instance, as an instrument of Mughal oppression. Right. So this is how in three distinct stages, the religious policy of Aurangzeb evolved over time. And on the basis of this, we may come to the conclusion that the traditional view of Aurangzeb's religious policy was oversimplistic. ठीक है? In reality, it was a complex policy adopted by a complex ruler to address emerging challenges and opportunities. And while religious hatred or fanaticism may have played a part, it was definitely not the most dominant determinant of his religious policy. ठीक है? Other objective material factors were also involved and were rather more dominant, right? So that is the note on which we may conclude. तो ये वाला जो शुरुआत वाला पोर्शन है ये तो मैंने डिक्टेट कर दिया था. Now to this portion we can further expand. Write down. तो वो लिखवाया था ना कि Marxist historians have identified 3 distinct stages for the evolution of Aurangzeb's religious policy. Write down stage 1 before 1769. Aurangzeb took certain steps to appease the ulemas and orthodox Muslim nobles. Full stop. Subpoint. While it is true that Aurangzeb was an orthodox Muslim by personal conviction, comma, these changes were in part brought about by circumstances created due to the war of succession. Full stop. Next point. Next main point. In the war against Dara Shikoh in the war against Tara Shikoh, comma, Aurangzeb had secured the support of the Islamic Orthodoxy by positioning himself as a champion of Islam, as a champion of Islam. As a champion of Islam. Within the framework of a conflict between Islam, and heresy, Full stop. Subpoint. In this way, comma, he had raised the hopes of the Islamic Orthodoxy, and now needed to appease them. Next main point. At the same time, comma, he did not want to antagonize the Hindus. Subpoint. As a result, he introduced certain measures to purify Islam. Purify को within inverted commas. To purify Islam. These included 1, 2, 3 करके लिख सकते हो. Number 1, banning of painting, music, dance, and history writing at the Mughal court. Number 2, discontinuing the practices of Tuladan, Jharokha Darshan, Sijda, and Paibos, which were considered un-Islamic. Number 3, striking the kalima or kalma, striking the kalima of the coins, OFF, of the coins, in order to prevent it from being trodden underfoot. trodden underfoot. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. Subsequently, comma, he also took some measures which may be perceived as harsh towards Hindus, which may be perceived as harsh towards Hindus, but were not necessarily a product of his religious bigotry. His religious bigotry. Full stop. Rather, for each of them, comma, there was an objective material factor. An objective material factor. Full stop. Subpoint number 1. He removed several Hindus from the position of Karodi. From the position of Karodi. Full stop. However, Aurangzeb had done it to provide employment to the educated Muslim youth. To the educated Muslim youth. Full stop. Once the experiment failed, comma, Aurangzeb was forced to hire back the dismissed Hindu Karodis. The dismissed Hindu Karodis. Number 2, Aurangzeb also instructed the governors of Banaras and Thatta. The governors of Banaras and Thatta. Thatta कहाँ पर? सिंध में, ठीक है? To destroy certain Hindu temples. Full stop. Once again, this was done to suppress local rebellions. ठीक है? So these are the developments during the first stage. Next, right, stage 2. 1679 to 87. लिखो. This stage begins with the reintroduction of jizya. The reintroduction of jizya, which had been abolished by Akbar more than a century earlier. By Akbar more than a century earlier. Full stop. Next point. To the traditional historians, this was a clear example. This was a clear example of Aurangzeb's religious bigotry and reversal of Akbar's liberalism and reversal of Akbar's liberalism. Full stop. Next point. However, Marxist historians have offered alternate explanations. Alternate explanations. Subpoint. Initially, they argued on the basis of the writings of Niccolò Manucci of Niccolò Manucci that this was an economic measure to augment state income since the Mughal Empire was facing a financial crisis. Full stop. Next subpoint. However, this theory was soon discarded. This theory was soon discarded as it became clear that the funds collected as jizya were not appropriated by the state at all. Were not appropriated by the state at all. Full stop. Rather, they were diverted towards the ulemas for the promotion of Islam. For the promotion of Islam. ठीक है? Next main point लिखो. In light of this, Marxist historians turned their attention towards contemporary politics. towards contemporary politics. Full stop. Subpoint. Aurangzeb wanted a full-scale invasion. Wanted a full-scale invasion of Bijapur and Golconda. Of Bijapur and Golconda. Full stop. But this was not possible. But this was not possible. Within the bounds of Islam. Within the bounds of Islam. Since Islam prohibited the killing of Muslims by Muslims, for wealth or territory. For wealth or territory. Thus, full stop, thus, Aurangzeb needed the ulemas to issue fatwas against the rulers of Bijapur and Golconda, comma, declaring them un-Islamic. Declaring them un-Islamic. Next subpoint. In light of this, comma, Marxist historians have argued that the introduction of jizya was an inducement offered by Aurangzeb to the ulemas to legitimize his Deccan campaign. To legitimize his Deccan campaign. Okay? Next main point. Further, it has been argued that the reintroduction of jizya was also supposed to demoralize the pockets of rebellious Hindu elites who had recently revolted against the Mughals. Against the Mughals. Against the Mughals. Okay? So, major development during the second stage, reintroduction of jizya. Uske other alag-alag explanations offer किए गए. Next, right, stage 3. Stage 3. after 1687. After 1687. Write down. A remarkable transformation in Aurangzeb's religious policy is visible following the completion of the conquest of Deccan. On the conquest of Deccan. Full stop. Next point. By 1687, both Bijapur and Golconda had been annexed. And the Mughal conflict against the Marathas had intensified. Against the Marathas had intensified. Full stop. Next point. Therefore, it was important for Aurangzeb. It was important for Aurangzeb to follow a conciliatory policy. A conciliatory policy towards the local Hindu Nayakas. The local Hindu Nayakas. Since he wanted their support to counter, the Marathas. Full stop. Next point. A general and scholar Bhim Sen Sinha, who was present at the court in Aurangabad, notes that no temples were destroyed in the Deccan. Following the annexation of Bijapur and Golconda. Full stop. Next point. Similarly, Aurangzeb even suspended the collection of jizya in the Deccan. From 1704. The official reason was the occurrence of frequent famines. Full stop. However, In reality, this was a political move to further gain the support of the Nayakas and neutralize the jizya issue, which had become a rallying cause of the Maratha resistance. Of the Maratha resistance. ठीक है? So these are the three stages. Next, conclusion. On the basis of this analysis, comma, it becomes clear that the traditional position regarding Aurangzeb's religious policy is oversimplistic. Full stop. Instead, his religious policy reflects a complex reality. Full stop. Aurangzeb was trying to address emerging challenges and opportunities. In response to which comma, his religious policy underwent constant evolution. While उसमें लिखो full stop. While the allegation of religious bigotry cannot be dismissed entirely, comma, it is also clear that fanaticism was not the only determinant. Rather, secular considerations played a more important role in determining Aurangzeb's religious policy. ठीक है. So this was Aurangzeb's religious policy. Next, what do we have to see? His Rajput policy. Once again, दो points of view. The traditional historiography क्या बोलता है ये? That Aurangzeb completely reversed the sage policy of Akbar. Completely reversed Akbar's policy. Akbar's Rajput policy was based upon carrot and stick. It was based upon mutual trust, loyalty, reward, and reciprocation. Aurangzeb completely broke this trust. Akbar had initiated a practice of complete non-intervention in the internal matters of the Rajput kingdoms. But Aurangzeb undid this when he intervened in the succession dispute at जोधपुर. ठीक है. जोधपुर में the Rathors were the ruling family, and their ruler Jaswant Singh had died suddenly without leaving a natural born male heir. His son was born posthumously. That means his son was born a short while after his death. But Aurangzeb did not recognize, right? Rather, he tried to plant one of his own people on the Gaddi at Jodhpur. Now, this was seen as an intervention in the internal politics of Marwar by the local Rathors. And factions emerge हो गए, pro-imperial factions and pro-royal factions, that is pro-Rathor faction. Now, the Rathor faction was led by Durga Das Rathor, a relative of the deceased ruler. Now, he led a resistance against the Mughals to support the cause of the newborn child of Jaswant Singh and his queen to sit on the gaddi. And this led to a rebellion which lasted for almost 20 years, right? So, in this way, he had reversed Akbar's policy towards the Rajputs. Secondly, the demand of jizya from the Rajputs was also a reversal of Akbar's religious policy. Akbar's Rajput policy was based on mutual trust and cooperation. Akbar had promised complete religious freedom and non-intervention in religious matters, and the demand of jizya from the Rajput states was a violation of this. And this became the main rallying cry for the rulers of Mewar to join the anti-Mughal struggle. Right. So, Mewar and Marwar were two of the most powerful Rajput states, and according to the traditional historians, their long-lasting rebellion proved disastrous for the Mughal Empire in the long run. It resulted in the disintegration of the Mughal Empire. कैसे? First of all, the Mughals lost their most loyal allies. And this represented a loss of strength. Since the Mughals, to a large extent, were dependent upon the military strength of the Rajputs for their imperial power. Rather, their long-term allies were transformed into their perpetual enemies. Breeding a lengthy conflict, as a result of which the Mughals had to sink large amounts of resources and manpower to contain the rebellious Rajput states. So, military expenses skyrocketed. Further, this was also harmful to the state from a commercial point of view, since Mewar and Marwar were located upon very crucial trade routes connecting Delhi, Agra, and Awadh to the Gujarat coast and even to Sindh. So, there was decline of trade as well. The state lost further resources. Further, this also led to the loss of experienced administrators and revenue collectors, right? So, it also led to administrative attrition. Further, since the Rajputs were a very crucial part of the delicate balance of power that Akbar had created within the Mughal Mansabdari, he was using the Rajputs to counterbalance the influence of other powerful groups of Mansabdars. Their loss also disturbed the balance of power within the Mansabdari. In the later stages, this is going to lead to a crisis within the Mughal Mansabdari. And according to the traditional historians, these were the reasons for the decline of the Mughal Empire, or this was one of the major reasons for the decline of the Mughal Empire. ठीक है? Now, Marxist historians क्या बोलते हैं? Are they going to accept the traditional point of view or challenge it? Challenge करेंगे. क्या challenge किया इन्होंने? That first of all, it is incorrect to say that Aurangzeb reversed Akbar's Rajput policy entirely. During the time of Akbar, what was the proportion of Hindu Mansabdars? %22%. But by the time of Aurangzeb, it was 32%. So not only had the number of Rajputs within the Mughal Mansabdari grown in absolute terms, they had also grown in proportion. Okay? So it was not a reversal. Rather, a very favorable change had taken place within the Mughal Empire with respect to the Rajputs. Secondly, ever since the recalling of Man Singh as governor of Bengal during Jahangir's reign, had there been any Rajput Subedars? No. But during the reign of Aurangzeb, two Rajput Subedars were there. Kon? Jaswant Singh of Jodhpur and Jai Singh of Amer, right? In fact, Jai Singh was shown immense favor by Aurangzeb. He was rewarded titles such as Mirza, which were traditionally reserved only for the high-ranking Mughal princes. And he was given the additional title of Savai, a distinct honor among the Hindu Mansabdars. Right? He was positioned above all other Mansabdars of his ilk. Further, Rajput commanders were also given important were also given command of important military campaigns. Against the Marathas as well as Assam. Okay? So, will it be correct to say that Aurangzeb completely reversed the Rajput policy of Akbar? No. कुछ cases में किया. For example, the decision to intervene in the succession dispute at Jodhpur was seen as a reversal of Akbar's policy towards the Rajputs. But एक चीज और याद रखनी चाहिए, that Jodhpur was acting as a subsidiary of the Mughal Empire. Right? And in accordance with the Mughal theory of kingship, what is the nature of kingship? बाबर और हुमायूं, अकबर एटसेट्रा किंगशिप को कैसे ट्रीट करते थे? किंगशिप was treated as the personal property of the ruler. ठीक है? And it was not limited, rather it was universal sovereignty. So, in accordance with the Mughal theory of kingship, the Mughal emperor enjoyed complete and personal rights not only over the Mughal crown, but also over the crowns and thrones of its subsidiaries. Therefore, in accordance with the Mughal theory of kingship, the decision of Aurangzeb to intervene in the succession dispute at Jodhpur लेजिटिमेट और इलेजिटिमेट? लेजिटिमेट, इस नजरिए से देखोगे तो लेजिटिमेट था। पॉलिटिकली इट मे हैव बीन नॉट एडवाइजेबल। ठीक है, और दूसरा आर्गुमेंट क्या है इनका? दैट औरंगजेब्स Rajput policy did not you can say did not result in the complete destruction of the empire. ठीक है, कैसे? लेट अस सी। फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, मारवाड़ and Mewar were the only Rajput states which rebelled. All the other powerful Rajput states such as Bundi, Kota, the rulers of Malwa, Amer, etc., they remained loyal and played an important role in containing the ruling class of Marwar and Mewar. Okay? So the Rajput rebellion was not a major crisis as it has been made out to be by the traditional historians. Okay? Thus, it was not a major crisis. And since it was not a major crisis, although military expenditure had gone up, it had not increased to a crisis level. So, military expenditure had risen within acceptable limits. Thirdly, as to the charge that the Rajput rebellion resulted in a permanent breach of relations between the Mughal Imperium and these states, that is also not true. Ultimately, by the 1690s, the rebellion was suppressed in a rather peaceful manner. दोनों साइड्स के बीच में समझौता हो गया। ठीक है, फोर्थली, as to the charge of the Rajput rebellion resulting in a major decline in Mughal commerce, especially overseas commerce, we must also remember that by this time, by the second half of the 17th century, Gujarat and Sindh had lost their commercial relevance with the emergence of other centers such as the Malabar, Coromandel, and बंगाल। तो गुजरात एंड सिंध का कॉमर्स अगर सफर भी करता तो कोई बहुत मेजर इंपैक्ट नहीं पड़ता। दैट इज द पॉइंट। एंड लास्टली, as to the concerns regarding the disruption of the balance of power within the Mansabdari, we should also not forget that the proportion of Rajputs had increased during Aurangzeb's reign rather than declining. So a case may be made that the balance of power within the Mansabdari had become rather more robust as compared to earlier. Okay? So on the basis of this, क्या कंक्लूजन पे आ सकते हैं हम? That traditional historiography suffers from some obvious flaws. इसमें सबसे बड़ा फ्लॉ क्या है? Conflation of Rajput policy and religious policy. ठीक है? Traditional historians की eyes में Aurangzeb's mistreatment of the Rajputs was a reflection of his own religious bigotry. We know that this is not the case. हमने पूरा सर्वे कंडक्ट किया है. Second, a personality-centric view of history. Traditional historians थोड़े old school थे. They believed that वो जो great man theory होता है ना, that there are some certain movers and shakers of history who make history. So history is written by history makers. ये व्यू जो है that is flawed. Marxist historians ने ये amply demonstrate किया है that it is not possible for any single individual, however powerful he may be, to bring about a radical transformation in the process of historical change. ठीक है? Rather, historical change is a process that is commanded by several factors, socio-economic, political factors, right? तो एक ये flaw है. And thirdly, they suffer from an inherent bias against Aurangzeb because they consider Aurangzeb to be the complete opposite of Akbar, right? And क्योंकि colonial historiography में अकबर को एक विलन की तरह पोर्ट्रे करने की कोशिश करी गई है, तो औरंगजेब के एक्शंस को थोड़ा बहुत जस्टिफाई भी किया गया है, right? And the nationalist historian जो कि ट्रेडिशनल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू को दिखाता है, they were trying to counter the narrative of the colonial historians. So responding to the colonial historiography has resulted in a lack of objectivity. ठीक है? These were the flaws of the traditional historiography, which Marxist historiography has tried to overcome. And in conclusion, we can write that these flaws must be taken into account when evaluating Aurangzeb's Rajput policy. ठीक है? Now, एक क्वेश्चन लिखो. Aurangzeb confirmed the decline of the Mughal Empire by discarding Akbar's sage Rajput policy. Discuss. 200 words, 15 marks. कैसे एड्रेस करोगे इसको? ये पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू किसका पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है? ट्रेडिशनल हिस्टोरियंस का या मार्क्सिस्ट का? दिस इज द पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू ऑफ ट्रेडिशनल हिस्टोरियंस. तो उसी को एक्सपैंड करके आप शुरू करोगे. राइट डाउन. Early nationalist historians such as A.L. Shrivastava and J.N. Sarkar have emphasized upon Aurangzeb's Rajput policy as a major contributor to the decline of the Mughal Empire. Decline of the Mughal Empire. Full stop. They argue that by reversing Akbar's Rajput policy, comma, Aurangzeb prepared the blueprint for the disintegration of the Mughal Empire. Next point. This perspective hinges upon two major positions. Hinges upon two major positions. Number one, Aurangzeb completely reversed Akbar's Rajput policy. Akbar's Rajput policy. Subpoint. Following the death of Raja Jaswant Singh of Marwad, Raja Jaswant Singh of Marwad, comma, Aurangzeb denied the claim of his posthumous son to the Gaddi. Full stop. This was a violation of the guarantee of Rajput autonomy which formed the bedrock of the Mughal Rajput alliance. ठीक है? Next subpoint. Further, his demand of jizya from Mewar was seen as a violation of Akbar's promise of religious freedom to the Rajputs. Next subpoint. Such reversals resulted in a joint rebellion by Mewar and Marwar that lasted for more than 20 years. Okay? So this is the first important position of the traditional point of view. And second likho, number 2. Aurangzeb's Rajput policy directly contributed to the Mughal decline. And once again in subpoint, start writing. Write down. The loss of the Rajput alliance represented a major loss of strength. Since the Rajputs Formed the sword arm of the empire. Formed the sword arm of the empire. Next subpoint. Animosity led to continuous conflict that sapped, S-A-P-P-E-D, that sapped the Mughal strength from within. Mughal strength from within. Next subpoint. Mughal military expenditure skyrocketed. Expenditure skyrocketed, causing financial stress. Next subpoint. The loss of experienced Rajput officers contributed to administrative rot. Experienced Rajput officials contributed to administrative rot. Next subpoint. Political instability in Rajputana. Next subpoint. Political instability in the Rajputana disrupted the trade links or disrupted the trade of Gujarat and Sindh. Next. लिखो. The delicate balance of power within the Mansabdari was disrupted with the loss of the Rajput faction. ठीक है. तो ये हो गया the traditional perspective, the traditional point of view. क्या दो चीजें याद रखनी है यहाँ पर? First of all, Aurangzeb completely reversed the Akbar's policy of Akbar, and second, the reversal led to the destruction of the Mughal Empire. Next main point लिखो. However, since the 1950s, Marxist historians have challenged the traditional perspective regarding Aurangzeb's Rajput policy. Next point लिखो. Number 1. They reject the idea that Aurangzeb completely reversed Akbar's Rajput policy. Akbar's Rajput policy. Sub-point. During Akbar's reign, the total proportion of Hindu mansabdars was merely 22%. Was merely 22%. Full stop. However, by Aurangzeb's reign, or however, under Aurangzeb, it had risen to 22%. 32%. Risen to 32%. ठीक है? Next sub point. Aurangzeb even revived the practice of appointing Rajput Subedars, which had been discarded since Jahangir's reign. ठीक है? Two notable Rajput Subedars, same point में, two notable Rajput Subedars were Jaswant Singh of Jodhpur and Jai Singh of Amer. Full stop. Additionally, comma, some Rajput mansabdars were given singular honors, such as Jai Singh, who was given titles such as Savai and Mirza. Comma, the latter being a title traditionally reserved for royal princes. Full stop. Next sub point. Furthermore, Aurangzeb continued to entrust Rajput commanders with leadership of important campaigns. Full stop. Next point. Main point लिख सकते हो. This suggests that the Mughal Rajput alliance had not weakened during Aurangzeb's reign. Full stop. Rather, in some respects, it may even have become stronger. In some respects, comma, it may even have become stronger. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. Further, comma, Marxist historians have also analyzed Aurangzeb's decision to intervene in the succession issue at Jodhpur also क्या लिखा है? Have also analyzed Aurangzeb's decision to intervene in the succession issue at Jodhpur from an ideological perspective. Subpoint. They argue that the Mughal theory of sovereignty considers kingship to be a universal institution and the personal property of the ruler. Full stop. Next point. As such, the ruler has absolute freedom to divide his sovereignty and devolve power in any manner or to any degree that he sees fit. ठीक है? Next subpoint. In this perspective, from this perspective, Aurangzeb's decision to intervene at Jodhpur was a legitimate one. ठीक है? तो एक तो ये हो गया that Aurangzeb did not reverse Akbar's Rajput policy. Second position क्या है इनका? That this perceived reversal also did not result in the complete destruction of the empire. So number 2 लिखो. Aurangzeb's Rajput policy did not result in the destruction of the empire. Did not result in the destruction of the empire. Write down. Firstly, Mewar and Marwar were the only two Rajput states to rebel. And other powerful Rajput states remained firmly within the Mughal camp. Full stop. Within the Mughal camp. Within the Mughal camp. Full stop. Therefore, the Rajput rebellions were definitely not the crisis. That they were earlier made out to be. ठीक है? That they were earlier made out to be. Next point. As such, the military expenditure also remained sustainable. Military expenditure also remained sustainable. Next point. Further, the situation was normalized when a compromise was struck between the Mughals and the rebellious Rajput kingdoms during the 1690s. Next point. As to the charge of commercial decline, it must be remembered that by the second half of the 17th century, with the emergence of new commercial centers like the Malabar, Coromandel and Bengal, Gujarat and Sindh had lost their relevance. Thus, any loss of commercial revenue was marginal. Any loss of commercial revenue was marginal. ठीक है? Next sub point. Finally, an argument may be made that due to the rise in number of Rajput Mansabdars, the balance of power within the Mansabdari had been strengthened rather than disrupted during Aurangzeb's reign. ठीक है? And finally, conclusion. On the basis of this analysis, it is clear that the traditional historiography suffers from certain obvious flaws. 1, 2, 3 करके लिख लो. Number 1, it tends to conflate Aurangzeb's Rajput policy and religious policy. And as we have seen, they were not necessarily linked with each other. ठीक है? Number 2, write down. The traditionalist historiography takes a personality-centric view of history. Thus resulting in accusing Aurangzeb of destroying the Mughal Empire, through his Rajput policy. Number 3, the nationalist perspective also lacks objectivity since it emerged in opposition to the biased colonial perspective. To the biased colonial perspective. Next main point लिखो. These flaws must be taken into account when analyzing Aurangzeb's Rajput policy. Aurangzeb's Rajput policy. And this is exactly what the Marxist historians have tried to do. ठीक है, तो ये हो गया औरंगजेब का राजपूत पॉलिसी. Have tried to do. Clear है ये? Online students, is it clear? Can we move ahead? All right. Now, next we have the Deccan policy of Aurangzeb. Right? So once again, two perspectives. Traditional perspective or traditional historiography. क्या बोलता है ये? That Aurangzeb's Deccan policy was a product of his imperialistic ambition and nothing else. That means that it was a matter of choice for Aurangzeb. तो इसके पास दो choices थे, whether to annex Bijapur and Golconda or whether to maintain the status quo. And because of his imperialistic ambition, he decided to annex Bijapur and Golconda. ठीक है, तो इसने अपनी मर्जी से किया. एक तो ये बोला है इसने. And second, that this proved to be disastrous for the Mughal Empire. Jadunath Sarkar ने क्या बोला? He compared the Deccani ulcer. He came up with the term Deccani ulcer. And compared it to the Spanish ulcer. As the Spanish ulcer had destroyed Napoleon, Deccani ulcer destroyed the Mughal Empire. He said that Aurangzeb was like a python who had swallowed more than he could digest. And what is going to happen as a result? The empire is going to get threatened, it is going to stagnate and then die. And this is exactly what happened. तो ये जो ट्रेडिशनल पर्सपेक्टिव है लेड बाय जदुनाथ सरकार एंड अदर्स, दे ले द ब्लेम डायरेक्टली ऑन द शोल्डर्स ऑफ औरंगजेब वंस अगेन। क्लियर? अब मार्क्सिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव क्या बोलेगा? that the conquest of Bijapur and Golconda was it a matter of choice or a matter of compulsion for Aurangzeb? It was a matter of compulsion for Aurangzeb, not a matter of choice. ठीक है? Further, they are going to point out that the conquest of Bijapur and Golconda was not something that was out of the ordinary when we consider the evolution of the Deccan policy of the Mughals from the period of Akbar himself. So, Mughal inroads into the Deccan region had started during the period of Akbar, and gradually from one emperor to the other, further inroads had been made. So Aurangzeb was simply taking that process to its logical conclusion, to its natural conclusion. So Aurangzeb's territorial aggression in the Deccan was not extraordinary. When we see the long arc of history. Okay? So it was simply the logical conclusion of the process that had started more than 100 years before him. Now, at the same time, the Marxist historians concede that Aurangzeb did make certain mistakes in the Deccan. And what were these? He was unable to perceive the true character of the Maratha revolt. इसको क्या लगा मराठा रिवोल्ट क्या है? It is simply a political rebellion by a small class of Maratha elites. But what was it in reality? It was a popular revolt. So the Maratha leadership enjoyed support at the ground level, and thus the revolt could not easily be suppressed with military superiority. It transformed into an insurgency, and the Marathas and the Mughals did not have the tools to resist the Marathas at the ground level. This led to a very lengthy dispute. What would have been the better course of action? A better course of action would have been to use Bijapur and Golconda as a buffer between the Mughal controlled areas of the Deccan and the Marathas. ठीक है? Secondly, after the annexation of Bijapur and Golconda, major transformation took place in the Mansabdari. क्या हुआ? A large number of Deccani nobles were integrated to the Mughal Mansabdari. ठीक है? What was the result of this? An emerging conflict between the Deccanese and others. Clear? This problem was further intensified. कैसे? While the number of Jagirdars, that means the people who were given high mansab ranks, those who were seeking Jagirs, that had increased, the availability of Jagirs remained constant. इसमें कोई इजाफा नहीं. और क्यों था ऐसा? Because due to the Maratha revolt, the military expenditure of the Mughals had increased immensely. The empire needed more and more manpower and resources. और सबके लिए क्या चाहिए होता है? पैसा चाहिए होता है. Now, after annexing the territory of Bijapur and Golconda, the Mughals had gained a huge chunk of fertile territory in the Deccan region. लेकिन instead of dividing it among the Jagirdars as Jagirs, Aurangzeb decided to, you can say, demarcate the entire territory as Khalisa land instead of Baibaki land. तो मुगल एम्पायर में जो एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड है उनको दो कैटेगरीज में डिवाइड करा जाता था, खालिसा लैंड एंड बैबाकी लैंड. खालिसा लैंड क्या होता था? क्राउन लैंड, मीनिंग revenue collected from crown land is going to grow directly into the imperial treasury. अब पैबाकी लैंड कौन सा लैंड होता था? That land which was set aside to be distributed among the Jagirdars as Jagirs. तो number of Jagirdars तो increase हो गए with the introduction of a large chunk of Deccani nobles of Bijapur and Golconda, but the availability of Jagirs remained constant. तो shortage of Jagirs का problem और ज़्यादा intensify हो जाएगा, and this is going to lead to the जागीरदारी crisis. ठीक है? Now, Aurangzeb had traveled to Aurangabad in 1679 and remained over there till his death. So, throughout the rest of his reign, he remained embroiled in the Deccan. He came back to Agra very few times. Okay? So, because of the involvement of the Mughals and Aurangzeb directly in the Deccan, the other regions were neglected. As a result of which, administration suffered, and military readiness in other frontier regions also declined, especially in the northwest frontier region, which had historically been the most volatile and most dangerous. Clear? Further, due to the rising financial demands of the empire, what happened to the burden of taxation? That increased. And क्या result हुआ इसका? As peasants are being forced to pay more and more taxes, are they going to be happy or unhappy? Unhappy. So this is going to result in frequent agrarian revolts. They are going to increase. And as agrarian revolts increase, what is going to happen to production and revenue? That is going to decline. At the same time, what is going to happen to the military expenditure to suppress these revolts? That is going to increase. And as military expenditure increases, the burden of taxation is also going to increase. क्या बन गया है यहाँ पर? साइकिल बन गया है, ठीक है? And this cycle is going to be very hard to break. Is this clear? अब ये बताओ that while Aurangzeb did make certain mistakes, is he solely responsible for all these problems? No. These problems could have been anticipated by other rulers as well. For example, it was not Aurangzeb's decision to violate the treaty between the Mughals and Bijapur and Golconda. That had been done by कौन? शाहजहां himself. 1636 में अपनी उसने ट्रीटी बनाई, 1656 में खुद ही वायलेट भी कर दिया. So Aurangzeb was responsible, but he was not solely responsible. And secondly, हाइंडसाइट तो 2020 होता है. दैट मींस इन हाइंडसाइट आप बहुत आसानी से बोल देते हो दैट औरंगजेब वाज अनएबल टू परसीव द ट्रू कैरेक्टर ऑफ द मराठा रिवोल्ट. बट even for present day governments with the tools of mass level data collection and interpretation tools, कई बार पता नहीं लगता है कि ग्राउंड लेवल पे कौन सा मूवमेंट चल रहा है, क्या मुहिम चल रही है, व्हाट द पीपल आर फीलिंग, हाउ आर दे गोइंग टू एक्ट. That is why policy formation and policy transmission, it is such an uphill task even for modern governments. And given the medieval character of the Mughal Empire, it is not surprising that Aurangzeb misperceived the nature of the Maratha revolt. But he was not the only one to do so, right? Maratha का जो problem है, that had emerged much before Aurangzeb during the period of during the 16th century itself, right? From then on, the Marathas had emerged as an important group within the Deccani politics. Deccani Muslim sultanates भी उनको use कर रहे थे. Marathas had been growing in power, and even the Deccanis were not able to perceive the future conflict that is going to emerge. Similar is the case with the Sikhs. The conflict emerged during the time of Jahangir himself. Now, ये जो cultural movements होते हैं, they have a tendency to evolve over time, to take up new characteristics, and it is not possible for a single individual sitting on the top of an extremely large and elaborate administrative machinery to divine changes or to divine what is going on at the ground level. So ये जो he was unable to perceive the true character of the Maratha revolt वाला argument है, that is a straw man argument, that is a false argument. ठीक है, हम इसमें completely औरंगजेब को blame नहीं कर सकते. And finally, the idea is that Aurangzeb's Deccan policy was not simply a matter of choice for him, rather it was a matter of compulsion. Why? Because it was important for the Mughals to control the Coromandel and Malabar trade. क्यों? क्योंकि Gujarat was losing its commercial relevance and the Mughals understood that if they were unable to control the Coromandel and Malabar trade, then they would be edged out of power by their southern rivals. और इसको contextualize करने के लिए एक clear equation मैं आपको बताता हूँ, that in 1605 the Mughal Empire that consisted of all of North India and apart from that Khandesh, Balaghat and Berar, they were generating an annual revenue of roughly 40 crore rupees. Okay? And in contrast, Bijapur alone was generating an annual revenue in rupee terms of roughly 37 crore rupees. In terms of territory, Bijapur was 1/6 the size of the Mughal Empire, but in terms of revenue generation, it was almost equal. So that means that the southern sultanates were posing an extremely strong challenge to the Mughal Empire right from the very beginning. And it had been a matter of compulsion for the Mughal emperors to respond to the challenge of these southern sultanates from the very beginning. ऐसा नहीं है कि स्टेटस को मेंटेन करेंगे तो काम चल जाएगा, इसको एक्टिवली रिस्पॉन्ड करना इनके लिए मजबूरी बन चुका था. एंड औरंगजेब वाज आल्सो फेसिंग द सेम कंपल्शन. Clear? So that is what we should remember. So the idea that the Deccan policy of Aurangzeb was simply a matter of choice for him, that is an invalid position. That is an oversimplification of things. It did prove disastrous, but it also came with certain benefits. तो उसका कॉस्ट बेनिफिट एनालिसिस अगर हम करते हैं तो बेनिफिट्स में क्या क्या बोल सकते हैं. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, जब्ती सिस्टम आ गया साउथ इंडिया में. सेकेंडली, मॉनेटरी यूनिफिकेशन ऑफ द नॉर्थ एंड साउथ इंडिया टुक प्लेस. थर्डली, इंडियन कॉमर्स, जो मुगल एम्पायर का कॉमर्स है, दैट वाज इंटीग्रेटेड विद द ग्लोबल नेटवर्क्स इन अ मोर कोहेसिव, मोर कंप्लीट मैनर, फॉलोइंग सिंस द मोस्ट ऑफ द यूरोपियन ट्रेडर्स वर इन्वॉल्वड इन द southern India. Fourthly, because of this, commercialization of agriculture took place at the large level, capital formation started taking place, etc. So these were some of the positive developments that took place. And even when the Mughal Empire declined, by this point of time, sufficient development of administrative machinery had taken place at the regional level that a number of regional powers emerged to provide effective governance. For example, Mysore emerge हुआ, Marathas emerge हुए, Hyderabad emerge हुआ, and they continued to provide effective governance to the people in these regional kingdoms for the next century or more. ठीक है, तो ऐसा नहीं है कि complete disaster ही था for the people of India. Yes, It may have been a disaster for the Mughal Empire, but it did not result in a major crisis, economic or political crisis. Situation remained somewhat stable only. ठीक है, तो ये हो गया है डेक्कन पॉलिसी. लिख कर लेंगे हम इसके बारे में. ठीक है, ऑल राइट. ऑनलाइन स्टूडेंट्स, if there are any doubts, please let me know. Otherwise, I shall be ending this class now. No doubts? Thank you.